Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you're doing well. I miss you guys so much. I can't believe we only have a few more weeks left. Can't believe it. It's almost there. Almost there. Okay. So we were talking about America. Now America is still very young at this point. It's just started, and they're just learning how all the branches work together and how they can juggle and how they can take care of each other and how they can do the best for our country. And one thing we looked at yesterday was the Supreme Court and John Marshall, who set lots of precedences for the Supreme Court. One of the most important was the judicial review, where the Supreme Court decides if the law agrees with the Constitution, then it's good. If it doesn't agree with the Constitution, then it's not good. So they compare everything to the Constitution, and that made the Supreme Court a lot more powerful. So that was John Marshall. Now, today we're going to kind of dig a little bit deeper into democracy itself. All right, let's see if you guys remember what democracy was. Here's our definition. Democracy was rule by the people. Okay? So democracy is when the people get to make a lot of the decisions, or they get to decide how the government is going to work. Well, today we're going to look at 3 different areas and the effects of democracy. We're going to show the strengths of democracy and the weaknesses of democracy in those 3 areas. So the first area we're going to look at is in government. Okay? In government, one of the major strengths of democracy in government is that people are involved with the government. The people help make the choices. They make the decisions. They vote on the people. Remember, we vote for the legislative branch. We vote for, or the electoral college votes for the presidency, but the electoral college votes for the presidency by how we as a people voted in each state. So we still have a say in all of that. So we have a lot of power in the decision making in our government. Now, by having a lot of decisions, that also means that we get to hold our leaders accountable for their choices. So if a leader is not making the choices that we think are best for our country, we don't have to vote them back in again. Or we are allowed to tell them, say, no, I don't like the way you're doing it. I think you need to do this, and give our opinion and give our suggestions. And if we still don't like it, we don't have to vote for them next time. So that's a power that strength democracy has in government. Now, with that also being said, back then and a little bit now, some people were worried about too much democracy. Because if the people have too much say or too much power in how decisions are made, well, remember, people are what? How are we born? We're born sinful. We're born with sin, which means we have selfishness. We have pride. So no matter how hard we try, there's always going to come a point, at least once or twice in our life, probably more, that we will make decisions that are selfish, that are only for us and not for the betterment of other people. And the Federalists were one of those groups of people that knew this. So they were a little bit worried about having too much democracy because of that reason. They knew people can make selfish decisions. They didn't want the people to make these selfish decisions about how our country was being run. They also didn't want the leaders to make these selfish decisions about how our country was run. So that is a weakness in government of democracy, is that we are sinful. We do have selfish things that we do sometimes, and we may make icky decisions for our country, and people didn't want that. So we had to try to counteract that a little bit. Another thing is, I'm supposed to be marking these up. I'm sorry, guys. Another thing is, so people can make selfish decisions, and another thing is that they may cause disrespect or rebellion against their authority. The authority is our leaders, the ones who are giving us what our rules are. Now, when you have democracy, and when you have people being able to make their own choices and getting to help decide how the government runs, sometimes it will cause disrespect or rebellion against authority. One example would be there was a college a university that had students in it, and the students didn't agree with the way that the college leaders were running the college, so they decided that they had the right to burn down the buildings of the college. Now, does that make sense? No. Is that helpful? No. Was that a selfish choice? Very selfish choice. They could have put people in danger. So by thinking that they know more about things than the government does, sometimes people will be disrespectful or rebel against authority. That is definitely a weakness of democracy and government. And again, it goes back to those selfish decisions. Why we sinful nature, and we can make selfish decisions sometimes. That's why some people were worried about it. So these two things can be a weakness. Now, some of the strengths are that we had said earlier were that people were involved with the government, and that we can help hold leaders accountable for their choices so that they don't make those selfish choices. Now, the next area we're going to look at is the church, okay? We're going to look at democracy in the church and the strengths and weaknesses of the church, of democracy in the church. So one of the big things with the strength of democracy and people getting to choose was people got to choose which church they went to. They got to choose who their pastor was or what building they wanted to go to. And not only that, we also have the freedom to tell others about Jesus, to preach about Christ. And that is one of the ways that we were able to help Christianity grow, because out in the West, all the pastors would move out to the West. And we got more and more pastors that way that helped spread Christianity across the country. So that is definitely a strength of democracy in the church, is we have freedom, we have choices. And also with taxes, because we got to choose where we went to worship, which church we went to, you also get to choose which church you give your money to. Well, if people are getting to choose which government or which church they give their money to, that meant that that they don't have to pay taxes to the government. So that was a strength in that taxes. The government didn't give the church taxes money, and they didn't take the tax money from the church, because people would give their money to the church, but they got to choose which church they went to. So those are very good strengths. Now, some of the weaknesses in the church from democracy are Christianity, because people could choose which church they wanted to go to. Christianity was treated as one of many different religions. So other religions had just as many freedoms as Christianity did. Now, when we're talking about people choosing which church to go to, yes, we may think of it as a building, but in Christianity, the building is not the church. The people, the group of people worshiping God, that is the church. So yes, a building helps, but if the building is empty and there's no people in it, is the church worshiping God? The building worshiping God? No. The building can't worship. It's the people inside. The people of a church are the people that matter, that make up the church. They're the ones. The actual people are the ones who worship God, not the building itself. So when we're talking about churches, that's what we're talking about. Not necessarily a building, but a group of people that worship God. You get to choose which group of people you're worshiping God to. Now, a couple of reasons with this one, as far as Christianity being treated as one of many religions, that caused a couple of weaknesses in it. One being, people were open to false teachings. All right? People were open to false teachings, which meant by you being able to choose which church, which group of people that worship God you went to, you could be listening to people who weren't telling you the truth, who didn't necessarily have the right biblical foundation of what Christ is and what Christ did for us. So that was kind of a weakness in there, is that people would be subject to false teachings and they may not learn the correct things about God. And another thing would be, because we have democracy and people get to choose what to do, some people thought that training was not necessary to be a pastor or to be a minister or to be a reverend. That they thought, well, as long as you read the Bible and you believed in God, that's all you needed to teach. No, there's so much more to it. You need to learn about the foundations. You need to make sure you're learning the biblical principles that we learn about in our Bible class and that we learn in church. You want to make sure that you are learning the right things. And there were plenty of people who didn't think you needed to learn any of that stuff, which also would back up into more false teachings. There was more reason to have false teachings if the pastors were not getting the proper training so they would know how to teach the people of the church. So there are a couple weaknesses in church, but there are a lot of strengths in democracy in church also. Now the next area we're going to look at is community. All right, community. Community is a place where you live, the people around you, your neighbors, your neighborhood, the cities, the towns that you live in. That's your community. One of the biggest strengths that came out of this, having democracy, is voluntary societies were formed. Well, what is a voluntary society? Well, let me show you. Good question. There we go. Voluntary societies are a group of people who try to solve problems. Okay, so they're a group of people who try to solve problems. What's that word? Voluntary societies. What does that sound like? What kind of word does it sound like? Volunteer, exactly. Well, what does volunteer mean? Volunteer means to give of your time freely. It means to help somebody without getting paid. That's what volunteering is you go and help others, but you don't get paid for it. And that's what these people did. This is what the voluntary societies did. They found out where there was a need, and they would help them. For example, people back then, they didn't have a home. There were people who were homeless. There were people who didn't have enough food. There were people who didn't have water. There were people that had needs. And they would find these people and they would help them the best that they could. That's what voluntary societies were. And we have them now. There's hospital volunteers. There is the Red Cross volunteers. There are soup kitchens. I think there's one I know of. Ruth's Pantry is one. There's all different places. Sometimes there are you can volunteer at some of these places to help out. Or you can volunteer at your family in your home, especially now. There's all kinds of things that you can do to help out people in your family. You can help your parents by helping them do some of the chores. Volunteer your time to do that. When we get back to church, you can spend some time volunteering at your church to help with people. Maybe if you want to help clean up, or maybe your church is a setup church where you have to set up a bunch of chairs. You could help set up a bunch of chairs or put them away. There's all kinds of things that you can do to volunteer. But way back here, way back in the beginning of our country, that's when volunteering started. It's an amazing, amazing thing. Another way, another strength that democracy has in community is by having these volunteer societies, people can improve their communities. They can help make their communities better by finding places that need help. Now, we do have a weakness in community from democracy. Again, it's almost the same one as back here. May cause disrespect against authority. Okay, now how can that happen? Well, what does that mean? Well, think about it. You get to choose which volunteer society you would want to work for or help out. Some would want to do this one and some would want to do that one. But these people over here think that theirs is better than this one, so then they would be mean to each other, or they wouldn't help, or they would hurt the other one. Again, selfish decisions, selfish choices, not thinking about other people. But having a choice as to which society you wanted to volunteer for could help that going against authority and not helping other people. So that was a slight weakness in that. Okay, so we talked a lot about the strengths and the weaknesses of all these different areas. Now, let's look at our government as a whole, okay? We have some weaknesses and we have some strengths, but in all of it, we are so blessed. And we have such an amazing government because we have so many opportunities and so many freedoms that we have because of what our founding fathers did. They were so wise in how they set things up. They knew that there would be people with selfish decisions, and they knew that there would be people with pride, and they knew that things wouldn't be perfect. But they did the best they could to set up a government that would try to help take care of a lot of those things. So it's not a total democracy. It's not a pure democracy. There are a couple of other types of governments that we mix in there, but our founding fathers chose a way to run our government that would help give us freedoms, but also try to help us to make good choices and to think about the rest of the country. Our forefathers were so smart and so wise, and we should be so thankful of the government that we do have, because we do have so many freedoms and so many opportunities that we get to use while we're here. One thing is, though, by having this great freedoms also gives even greater responsibility, because we have to hold ourselves accountable to our own actions. Okay, we can't blame anybody for the mistakes we made. We make those because we have a democracy. It's our choice to make the choices that we've made. So we have to own up to them. Sometimes they're great decisions. Sometimes they're not so great decisions. We all make icky decisions sometimes. We have to own up to them. And if we can fix them, we fix them. If we need to apologize, we apologize. Okay? We're not perfect. We're humans. But we still want to follow God's teachings. And God knows that we're not going to be perfect. So we just have to do the best that we can and try to make the best decisions. And when we don't, we hold ourselves accountable for what we've done. Okay. So with all of that, basically, our big idea today is that democracy brings strengths and weaknesses to all three of these areas, not to mention our whole country. Democracy has its strengths and weaknesses in everything. We just chose to look at these three areas: government, church, and community. So for today's assignment, I have your paper right here. There we go. Okay. So the first part of it, 1 through 5, is going to be cause and effect. Okay, remember, cause is something that happens because of what's over here. So let's look at number 1, the effect. Some pastors did not go to schools for training. Okay, why did some pastors not go to schools for training? Well, let's look over here on this side. Okay, number 1, because Americans wanted to choose which church to support. Would that be a reason? No, that doesn't have to do with the pastors. Because the country could become immoral with too much democracy. No, that doesn't really have anything to do with why the pastors did not go to school for training. Because Americans thought they did not need to listen to their pastors. They could decide what to believe on their own. No, that's not quite there either. D, because they thought democracy meant they could ignore their authorities. No. E, because they believed that any man who knew God and the gospel could preach without training. Ah, that's right. So because they believed this, then this happened, okay? So because the people believed that any man who knew God and the gospel could preach without training, because of that, that's why some pastors did not go to schools for training, okay? So I want you to match up the causes and effects to here. Then down here on the bottom, it says write true if the statement is true. If the statement is false, write the corrections for the underlined word. So let's look at number 1. Number 6. The Federalists believed that too much democracy was not good. Okay, is that true or false? Yes, that is true. So number 6 is true. Okay? So then I want you to go through. Now, if you find one that's false, then the underlined word, I want you to correct it. Make the sentence true. All right? Okay. If you have any questions, just email your teacher. When you're done, when you're finished your assignment, you can either print that out or just number across, right, on a piece of paper, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then the answers. Email it to your teacher for a participation grade. All right, guys? Only a few more lessons left. All right, guys. Have a great day. I'll see you soon.